Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. Brandon Dyson from TLDR Pharmacy has been nice enough to talk to me over the next two shows, and we're going to talk about residency interviews. The first thing we're going to talk about is some best practices, some ideas that we had about residency interviews, some do's and don'ts. And then the second episode is going to be me asking questions as if I was an interviewer and he is an interviewee, not only just answering the question, but also the logic behind the question. So again, I hope you enjoy this two-part series. So first, Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you have in terms of the materials that can help us, and then we'll go through some sample questions.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So first off, there is TLDRPharmacy.com, where I wrote that whole website is the thing that I wish existed when I was in pharmacy school. And so that goes through clinical stuff, but it also, pertinent to what we're talking about tonight, goes through residency stuff, namely how to get into residency, how to survive the residency once you get in it, all important things, and then how to, get a job afterwards, right? All important stuff. So there's multiple free articles that you can read to help prep yourself for interviews, for, the showcase, which is past now. And then also we have two guides that are relevant. There's Interview Mastery, which is a collection of job interview questions that I can almost guarantee you'll get asked a number of them on any residency and really any job interview. And there's also Mastering the Match, which is sort of, here is everything that I know about getting into a residency, how to do it. And here's your best way to position yourself. And the cool thing is this: if you purchase Mastering the Match, you actually get Interview Mastery for free along with it. So they're kind of bundled together. So anyway, we have those there as the sort of sum total of everything that I know on the subject. But we're hoping to give you guys a lot of that stuff tonight, just in kind of go through some scenarios and give you some more specific advice as it can pertain to you. Okay,
so let's say I get I'd say letter in the mail, but that doesn't happen. It's a letter in the inbox, right? And I say, oh my gosh, yay, I got an interview. And when does that happen? Do all the interview yeses and nos come at the same time? Do you get nos, or do you just get an empty inbox? Like, is there a deadline where they say, is there like an 11:59 p.m. where you might get one? Is it like The Voice where, you can get saved and somebody can push the button and, grab you? How does that work?
Yeah, they find out, they offered her an interview, and so then they can push the button too. No, so basically every residency program has their own timeline. Some will say, all right, our cutoff is January 15th. Some will say that's very early. It's not that, but some are like, they're going to say it's this time or it's this time, and it's different for everyone when they decide, okay, this is when we're going to have invited everyone to an interview. There isn't at least not that I'm aware of, a formal, you have to have, a cutoff by this time or whatever, or made all of your invites by this time. But that being said, I also don't think, so you can get emails at any given time. Basically, you're going to start getting them invites for interviews mid to late January and on through middle of February. And, remember the match happens mid-March. So certainly by mid-February, I think, is a reasonably decent cutoff for when you're going to have found out if you're going to have an interview. And you may have even had an interview at that point. And I would like to think that most, if not all, programs will let you know if you didn't interview, if only because you're going to start bothering them. You're like, hey, I applied. And it's a very, what you would expect from a denial. Hey, we really appreciate your interest. Unfortunately, we've decided that even though you're a very qualified it's the same kind of corporate speak.
The pain is real, and it doesn't soften the blow.
No, it hurts. It hurts. I received it too, man. It does not feel good.
But let's talk about some of the practical aspects of this. So the average person applies to 8 to 10, and you would think, oh, great, maybe I get 10 interviews. That would be fantastic. But maybe that would be actually disastrous. How does a fourth-year student afford to go jet setting in the middle of their API rotations around the country?
Yeah, and so be very careful with that. Thank you for bringing that up, Tony. Like, let's say you get 10 interviews. One, congrats. That's you're baller. That's great. Like, that's
Sure.
Kudos to you.
Yeah.
But I mean, in some ways, it's a good problem to have. But especially if you've, clustered them all over, or if you've got them spread out all over the country, that's a flight. And if you don't know someone where you can crash on a couch, that's a hotel. I mean, residency interviews are 5 to 8 hours long in some cases, right? So it's not like you can just like fly in real quick, do a quick interview, have some coffee, and be on your way back home. Like you're going to be wasted at the end of it. It's grueling. So you have to keep costs in mind and make sure you can afford that, like really price it. And obviously it's not a good idea to just like try to max out your student loans, right? So you don't want to borrow
right.
money at 6.5% to pay for all of this. So do kind of keep that in mind.
Okay. Well, what is it like? So let's say I do get an interview. I've gotten my first class seat on Southwest Airlines. I'm in the front row, ready to get moving. I carried everything on to make sure that I don't lose luggage. I get off the plane. Is there somebody there to greet me?
I really doubt it. No. You won't be greeted until the lobby the morning of the interview, and it'll either be by probably the residency director or most likely the current residents will meet you there. And a lot of programs will have them like buy you coffee or tea or whatever and try to soften you up a little bit, so to speak. But don't forget, the interview has started, right? No matter what, like, oh, we're going to get coffee and we're just going to chat. No, you're interviewing at that point in time, so don't forget that.
We won't tell. What happens at the coffee stays at the coffee.
Yeah.
The real interview is later. But just tell me, how do you get along with people?
Right. No, so you tell me about a time where you had a bad experience with a coworker.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get into the specific questions, let's talk about that day. So I've landed. Let's say that the interviews maybe start later in the morning. Either I got in really early or I got in the night before, which might be a little bit better. But I'm gone and I've met with them. What does it look like to go through the interview process from beginning of day to end? I know it's exhausting, especially doing multiples, especially with the APPEs and APPEs and trying to balance all of that stuff. You're already homeless as a fourth year student, so it's the homeless person just sitting around, trying to find an Airbnb or trying to find a friend. What's that day look like? Can we break it into parts in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. So it probably starts in the hospital or between 8 and 9 o'clock. So early. Definitely recommend getting in the night before. Make sure you sleep as much as you can beforehand, right? Because it's a long day. And try to eat a little breakfast if you can, and make sure you have a water bottle because you have no idea. Like the day might change throughout the day. But to break it in parts, you go there. You're typically going to have coffee. It's totally fine. They're going to offer to buy you coffee. It's not like uncouth to accept it or whatever. Go for it, man. Take that coffee. If they offer a muffin and you feel like a muffin, go for it too, right? Like absolutely go nuts, right? So you're going to have that. And a lot of times that will be with the current residents or whoever it's with. And they're just going to talk to you, get to know you. Maybe they give you a quick tour of the hospital. It all depends, and tell you about the program. Remember that once you've gotten invited to the interview, right? Like that's step one. And at this point in the game, you're qualified for the residency. So the fact that you even got invited to the interview, you're in the running, and it's now a personality based thing. It's making sure your personality fits with the program more so than, on paper, they've already decided that you're a fit. Now it's just how do you mesh with the program? So really, I can't stress enough to be yourself. Don't try to be what you think the program wants you to be. Be yourself and be an honest evaluation of the program as well. So you'll have that initial part. you'll typically then, if you haven't already met with the residency director, and they'll give you through the ins and outs. Here's what the program is. Here's our required rotations. Here's yada, yada, yada. At various points throughout the day, you can expect to do a clinical case where you go through, they'll typically on paper, here's a sample case. We want you to give you our thoughts on it. You already probably know this going in, but you can expect to give a presentation, a 15-ish minute presentation on some clinical topic. And you can expect to be subjected to a battering ram of interview questions from the residency director, current residents, every clinical preceptor, the operations manager, the director, and name it, anyone that you might talk to throughout the year is a potential interviewee, maybe even just a tech or a staff pharmacist, because they really are treating this like a job interview for someone that, you're going to be working very closely with these people many hours throughout the whole next year. So
that presentation, though, I just want to stop you right there. So I'm picturing, I was at ASHP. I saw 3,000 of those tubes, right? Poster tubes, you're carrying them around. And I think there was even a poster tube rest station where you could rest the poster tube and if you would trust the people there. But that presentation, are you bringing around a stick or a USB? Are you presenting from memory? Are you bringing handouts? Do you really bring your poster and pin it up on the wall? What does that look like?
Yeah, I love the poster parking. It's like a stroller station at Disney.
It is. It's right next to the massage station. They had 6 massage therapists working round the clock at ASHP, and it just happened to be next to the showcase, next to the stroller parking or poster parking. But but yeah, tell me about this presentation. I think that's kind of a little bit. I guess it's fuzzy for me.
So the presentation, I doubt you're going to be bringing a poster or anything. You're going to have probably emailed it to the residency director, PowerPoint slides, unless they ask some other format. I recommend printing out a few copies ahead of time, unless they specifically say, no, don't worry about it. And you can ask that, in an email. That's totally fine. No matter what, even if the residency director is like, oh, don't worry about a flash drive or whatever, or stick, we've got it. Bring a stick, please, because and email it to yourself too. Have as many safety nets as you can, because stuff can and will go wrong. And I'll pick on the VA here, but if you're presenting at the VA, you can't just put any flash drive into one of their laptops. Your flash drive isn't going to work. It's like Fort Knox, meanest tyranny.
I didn't know that. My wife works at the VA, but I didn't even think about something like that.
Yeah, it's it's secure lockdown. So even you're oh, it's cool, it's on this flash drive. Nope. So stuff can and will go wrong. Your presentation may get moved. Oh, we were going to have you present at 11:30, but now we're going to have you present at 12:30. Is it stuff like that can happen. So just have as many, safety nets, like I said, as you can. Email it to yourself, email it to the residence director, have it on a flash drive. And unless they say not to, bring a couple of printouts just in case.
What does the room look like? I guess I'm picturing, warm leather chairs, a coffee pot in the corner. There's a little mini fridge with waters for you. Lab coats all around. Everybody's got time off to spend and just hang out with you. Nobody's getting up and interrupting you. Nobody's coming in late. It's just they're all there to see you.
Yep, that's exactly absolutely nailed it. So right, this is happening. Those are typical times. Let's say 11:30. Right, that's happening during people's lunches. People are going to shuffle in and out. They typically will assign. Most programs are going to assign. Okay, so this many, you preceptor, you resident, you preceptor are going to watch this present. They'll assign a certain number so that they have enough people, enough eyes on your presentation to evaluate you. And then anyone else that can come in, will. But at my institution, I'll get assigned. You're going to see this presentation and this presentation at a minimum, and then if you can make the other ones, cool. But so you're guaranteed some. And sometimes they'll try to pick it out. I do oncology, so if someone has the gall to do an oncology presentation, they'll definitely Brandon's going to go to this presentation, they'll do stuff like that. just so they have, just so that you can get peppered with questions on it. That's the real answer.
We'll talk about the questions a little bit later, but can you give us a little bit of caution in terms of trying to impress with this presentation?
Yeah, remember it's 15 minutes, right? And so you have to be able to do something that's digestible in about 15 minutes, right? I've seen people come in and try to do diabetes or the chest guidelines, God forbid. And it's you can't do that. You just can't. You're presenting to it's not going to work. You're in a little conference room in the hospital. Typically you have 15, you can't cover something that diverse. So pick something much, much, much small. Instead of the chest guidelines, if you have to do anti-coag, do the use of NOACs as prophylaxis in cancer patients you can pick a much, much, much narrower topic where you're dealing with only a handful of studies at best and saying, here's this, or you can do a clinical case review. Hey, here's this neat patient I saw on an appy rotation that had whatever. I saw a really good one once on hyperthyroidism where they ended up doing it was hypo. They had myxedema coma, and she went through the whole clinical case and how it related to guidelines, and where we differed from guidelines and where we didn't and why this, it was very well done. And you can do something like that in 15 minutes to where it's informative for the people and you're not skipping, 90% of the guidelines. So make sure it's digestible.
How do you handle disinterest? I don't mean that they don't care. It's just maybe you are the 16th of the 16 they invited and they are glazing over. How did you, I'm not saying that they were disinterested in your presentation, but how do you not take their energy and kind of bring your energy?
I'm one of the most boring people alive, so I'm sure they're disinterested.
Still got a residency.
Yeah, touche.
Georgetown, no less.
No, so you just have to. It's in your presentation. It's their 16th time, but it's unless you got 16 interviews, it's not your 16th time, right? This is your thing, your subject, and not you don't have to be an expert, world class presenter, but you have to, we still have very little to go by from you, right? So your presentation is a big part of your on-site evaluation, your enthusiasm, your correctness in if you're giving a presentation that you've had time to prepare, you better be an expert in it, right? You better know it backwards and forwards and know every single study you included. So you got to just be mindful of that. Look at people, don't mumble, really don't mumble. And tape yourself, practice in a mirror, and really watch your ums, ahs, and your awkward pauses that you don't realize you do, because you do them, I promise. I just did it right there. And I do it too. I need to practice better. Oh my God, now I'm self-conscious about it. But be mindful.
And he's not doing this on purpose. It just happened. It's a Toastmasters thing.
Yeah.
We would ring a bell every time you did an and after a while you're just like, all right, this Pavlov dog thing we just got to stop. And eventually you just breathe and remember to breathe and all of that stuff. So, but take us from that presentation. So now we've given a presentation. We've been around the hospital a little bit. What's that afternoon like? What makes it 5 hours or 8 hours? That just sounds miserably long.
It is. So there's a lunch. You get a lunch. That's nice. You're still interviewing. Someone's giving you
don't let your guard down.
So be careful. Obviously, again, they're going to buy you lunch. Most programs buy you lunch. And so start ringing a bell. Now I'm self-conscious about it. So most programs will buy you lunch. So just be mindful, right? Don't get sloppy spaghetti, right? Just do you're wearing your best professional suit and attire and everything. So don't do something that's going to be awkward to eat, while you're still interviewing, because you are still talking. So kind of keep that in mind. I was not hungry even a little bit, so I just forced myself to eat what I could when I interviewed, because I was a lot of nerves. So there's that. There's still the clinical case where they're going to, give you a case and kind of they want you to walk through a treatment plan for it. So there's that. And there's just multiple rounds of interviews, but with preceptors, like I said, with anyone that might have hands-on with you.
Can we be more specific about how we approach an interview if we know who the person is? For example, residency director walks in. Do you treat the residency director any different than you would a pharmacy technician, a staff pharmacist, or PGY1?
I really don't think so. No, I think depending on the question, would you kind of like butter up to the residency director and like talk down to a tech? Like that's not like you.
Bad judge. You have chosen poorly.
You chose very poorly. So you don't want to do that, right? It's, to me, again, like in the interview, you're here, like you've already won on paper. You've already been from a pool of 80 or 100 people down to 15 or so that get interviewed. So you've already made a huge cut. It's just your personality. And the questions that they're asking you on these things are standard job interview questions. So no matter who's asking, there's not a way to game the system. If it's a resident, like I'm going to really do this thing that I think she wants to hear. There's no real way to do that. It's just giving an honest, kind of thoughtful answer. That's what we're looking for.
Well, let's talk about these specific questions. I think it'd be good to go through them. Now, you have 30 questions. We're not going to go through that many. Neither of us needs a residency. Yeah. We're just trying to help here.
This is for the listeners.
But let me kind of frame the way that it's set up. It's color-coded. General job performance-related questions, pharmacy-specific questions, professional growth-related questions, and personality-related questions. So before we get into the weeds, I want to know if you can go over exactly what that means each time. So what is a general job performance-related question?
So a general job performance-related question, to give you a little preface, I've been a hiring manager before. Not for pharmacists specifically, but I was a hiring manager for Walgreens. I was a store manager or an executive assistant store manager there before getting into pharmacy school. And I've done it before that as well. They're the same exact questions, the same questions that you if you go to an Applebee's and apply for a hostess, they will ask you questions like this because they're questions about how you interact with other coworkers. How do you interact? Are you a problem solver or self-motivator? Do you get along well with others? What happens if you disagree with a coworker or with a customer/patient in our field? The premise behind the questions is identical no matter what field you're on, and they're asked in any field. Their intent is to figure out how you performed in some past situation, using that as a proxy for how you might perform in a future situation.
Okay, so a pharmacy-specific question. Are these pharmacotherapy? What does that mean?
They are going to be more closer. So they're not. You might get asked about a clinical intervention you made. You might get asked about rotations that you've had or what you think is a good clinical pharmacist versus a bad one. So they're not about you specifically like reciting drug knowledge per se. Even the clinical interview or the clinical intervention you may have made, it's not about the actual intervention you made. It's how you approached, I don't want to say correcting a doctor, right? But how you approached bringing up a recommendation or a suggestion. How did you integrate with the medical patient care team to improve patient care, right? It's not about, oh, well, you should streamline antibiotics because he's been afebrile for 40. It's not about that. It's about most of these end up being interpersonal relations, even across all four of the kinds of categories that we've made in interview mastery, whether pharmacy specific or job performance related, almost all of them are under the umbrella of interpersonal relations.
So what is a professional growth related question then?
And so the idea there is where do you see yourself? Is residency an end game for you just so that you can get a staff inpatient pharmacist job and sit there for the next 30 years? Or do you want to go specialize in something? What do you think about the pharmacy profession as a whole? Like not even just outside of you, but where do you see the profession going? We've started doing vaccinations, immunizations in the last 10 years. We're starting to see collaborative practice agreements, like where, techs are starting to get, increased span of like responsibilities. We're getting mild prescribing rights for birth control and things like that in some states. So where do you see that going? So asking you stuff like that.
And then the last group is the personality related questions. I've actually read that students will like or dislike a teacher within the first 30 seconds of the entire semester. So that's,
ouch.
I know, right? And it happened near where you are, down in Charlottesville. I think it was out of the University of Virginia that they did this study. But basically, nothing the professor did changed. So the authenticity, who they were, it was so apparent so quickly that these people kind of latched onto it. So what is a personality related question as it relates to residency?
A lot of it, honestly, is just they want to know what you do for fun and maybe how you handle stress, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of stress as a resident, so if your answer is like, oh, I'd like to go out and get really drunk, like that's not a good answer, right? It's so that what they want to see is, do you have a support system that you can cope with stress? Like, what do you do for fun? It's also just to get to know you. Again, you're going to be spending 50, 60 hours a week for an entire year with these people. So it's like, oh, you play guitar, that's cool, so does my son, or so do I, oh, I love that movie too, you like that book. It's like literally, they're going to be your coworkers and compadres. And so there's really not a way to game those questions at all, right? It's just be you, right? Just be, and go through and say, oh, I do this, here's my hobbies. Again, like, don't showcase that you like to go get really drunk when you're stressed, obviously, like maybe don't showcase all of your hobbies if they're bad, but kind of go through and just, that's what they're looking for. Who are you as a person? Like, ignore the field of pharmacy. Pharmacy is just a little slice of your life. There's a lot, do you have a family? Do you have kids? Like, they're just looking at everything.
Oh, well, let's actually address that, and then we'll go into the actual questions. So what, in terms of, when you go to an interview, there are things that you are allowed to ask, and there are things you are not allowed to ask. So let's say I have, well, I don't know, and I'm not trying to catch you. I'm just saying.
You.
I'm
Busted.
Calling someone while we're talking. No, so let's pretend that instead of applying for residency when I did, with no kids, with a new wife, instead I am applying with 3 6-year-old daughters, and I'm not sure how this is going to impact them. I'm just kind of feeling my way through and things like that. What are they allowed to ask, and what are they not? Is it covered in the same way that it was covered when you were an EXA at Walgreens?
Yeah, absolutely was. It's illegal to ask that question, right? Like, as it pertains to as hiring, like, you can't base a hiring decision based on, if you plan on having children or if you currently have children or anything like that, or even if you're getting married. So stuff like that can naturally come up, right? But and if just to ease fear, so you don't have to feel secretive. One of my good friends is a resident this year. He has 4 kids. So like, he did it. I know someone else that went on maternity leave during residency. She did fine and got where she needed to be. I know someone else at Georgetown, in fact, she got married during residency. Nuts, crazy lady, crazy people. But like, it's like, in my at least limited experience, admittedly, like, I have not seen it affect whether you get a residency or not. I was saying those, not specifically those questions. I'm glad you pointed that out, Tony. I was just, those personality related questions are really just to get to know more about you.
Well, the reason I ask is because I also worked for Walgreens as a pharmacist, but I was part of admissions, and they just over and over again made so clear, you cannot ask this.
Yeah.
You cannot ask this. They never said, ask this, ask this, ask this. We did, and a lot of times they would try to script questions, but it sounded that way, and that didn't really work.
It never does.
It doesn't, yeah. But they're very clear on. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. And next episode, we're going to have part 2, where we'll have a back and forth, a mock interview, as if Brandon was coming in as a potential resident, and I as either a residency director or someone interviewing him, and I think you'll get quite a bit out of it.
Hey, what up? This is Brandon Dyson from TLDRPharmacy.com. Why am I interrupting you in the middle of this excellent podcast? Because as soon as you're finished with it, I want you to come to my website, obviously. At TLDRPharmacy.com, you'll find a whole boatload of free clinical guides and cheat sheets. They'll save you hours of time, and they'll make learning pharmacy easy. And also, look, our guides are fun. Whether you're a student or a practicing pharmacist, you'll enjoy reading them, I promise. Check out TLDRPharmacy.com and get better at pharmacy.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.